I mean, the Assyrians, war was their business, wasn't it? With their sophisticated weapons and armour, the Assyrians were a war machine whose unstoppable progress seemed to spell disaster for Egypt. Yet after little more than 20 years, the Assyrians returned east to tackle problems at home, leaving vassals in charge of Egypt. Based at the delta city of Sais, these were the Saite kings, shrewd Egyptian politicians who first appeared to serve their Assyrian masters, but soon became strong enough to declare their independence. Egypt was now back in Egyptian hands. The Saites instigated a spectacular renaissance in native culture, at the heart of which lay Egypt's most powerful symbol of national identity: mummification. But no longer limited to humans, there was an explosion of animal mummification. Everything from dogs, cats, crocodiles, ibis, and even tiny shrews. The ancient Egyptians had always mummified their dead, both human and animal. And with the Saites, we can almost see it as a way of the Saite kings trying to declare, we are Egypt, we are important, this is what makes us special. No one else in the ancient world could mummify like the Egyptians, and so they rolled it out a millionfold. With animals specifically bred for mummification and then sold as offerings at temples, the Saites had reinvigorated Egypt's oldest industry. Death was once again big business. Now, this might look pretty silly, but around 2,000 years ago here at Saqqara, this would have been a very common sight. This place would have been packed with pilgrims, with priests making animal mummies, and they'd be trundling the mummies across the landscape in carts like this one. So we must get out of our minds this idea of Egyptian priests as these pious, quiet figures wafting through the landscape, when by this time it was all carried out in great numbers. And it was Egypt's endless ability to reinterpret its core beliefs that was the key to its longevity. For millennia, the Egyptians had believed that the pharaoh was a living god who embodied the soul of Egypt. When the king died, their soul lived on in their mummified body, which must be kept safe to guarantee the continuity of Egypt. So they'd always buried their rulers in the safety of pyramids or elaborate rock-cut tombs. But in times of increasing unrest and foreign rule, the Egyptians could no longer rely on even having a pharaoh to bury, and so they turned to another centuries-old practice. The Serapeum at Saqqara is a huge subterranean tomb complex in which the concepts of kingship and animal mummification were fused together. For each of these giant granite sarcophagi once contained an animal believed to embody all the qualities of kingship. This is the burial site of the sacred Apis bull. These were the bodies of mummified bulls of such importance to the Egyptian mindset. They extended all this effort and cost to create a suitably impressive burial site, and they've done this in spades. As one bull dies and is mummified and buried, the other one is then worshipped in life, and at death mummified and buried again. And so there's a real progression. The cult of the Apis bull dates right back to the beginning of Egyptian history, and it's closely linked to the pharaoh. It was believed that when the sacred bull died, it became one with Osiris, the god of the afterlife.
One of the most famous beauty features is the eyeliner, so typical for the ancient Egyptians. Apart from enhancing your makeup, it has a very practical purpose. The lead compound used for the kohl protects the eyes from infections. Wigs are another popular accessory. They even serve for lovemaking, as texts tell us. To arouse her man, the Egyptian woman does not put on a fine negligee, but her wig instead. The importance of beauty is also shown by numerous funerary goods related to beauty care, such as ointment vessels, perfume bottles, combs, or precious mirrors. It's nowhere better illustrated than in the tomb of Nefertari in the Valley of the Queens. On every pillar and on every wall, she's shown with different robes and pieces of filigree jewellery, objects of timeless beauty. And timelessness is an important asset for the ancient Egyptians. In politics, too. Akhenaten's successor Tutankhamun restores the rule of the old gods. 11 pharaohs follow under the name of Ramses. The most famous of them is Ramses II. Under his reign, the biblical exodus from Egypt is said to have taken place. His numerous temples and colossal statues make him famous. Always at his side, the fairest of the fair, his wife Nefertari. Nefertari and Ramses II are a true power couple. The pharaoh seems to know quite well what he has in his clever wife. Even if Nefertari does not rule as a pharaoh like Hatshepsut, she commands extraordinary powers and great influence. For many years, the conflict between Egypt and its northern neighbours, the Hittites, has been simmering. At Kadesh, the two empires clash. For Ramses, the battle ends in a lucky draw. The Hittites are under pressure from the growing Assyrian Empire and seek peace with Egypt. After tough negotiations, Ramses II and the Hittite king Hattushili III conclude the first peace treaty in history, not least thanks to the skillful diplomacy of Nefertari.
Nefertari must not only have been a beautiful woman, but also a very intelligent woman. And we have clear evidence that she played a role in the negotiations for the peace treaty with the Hittites, as she was in charge of the correspondence with the Hittite queen Puduheba. So Nefertari played a crucial role in achieving the first peace treaty ever. A copy of it is hanging now in the building of the United Nations in New York.
Being able to read and write hieroglyphics is far from being a commonplace skill in ancient Egypt. Only a few Egyptians mastered this art. In her tomb, Nefertari has herself depicted with a writing tablet before Thoth, the god of scribes and science. The message is unmistakable. She is a scribe. Shortly before her death, Ramses honors his wife with a last gift. He has two temples built at Abu Simbel in the south of the empire. One of them is dedicated to the goddess Hathor and to his beloved Nefertari. And her statues at the temple are not just as tall as those of Ramses, they're even a few inches taller.
Ramses II must have adored Nefertari because he built for her a magnificent temple beside his own great temple in Abu Simbel. It seems that she died shortly after this temple was inaugurated, and this must have been a big blow for Ramses II. Although he must have had dozens of women in his harem, Nefertari seems to have been the love of his life and his support.
Just a few years later, another woman ascends the throne, Tausret. At At this time, Egypt is plagued by the raiding sea peoples. Then Ramses III succeeds in winning a decisive victory, recorded for posterity in his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. Yet under his successors, Egypt experiences a severe economic crisis. With Ramses XI, the new kingdom descends into chaos and revolt. The third intermediate period begins. Egypt breaks up into two dominions. Apart from the high priests of Amen in the south, a Libyan dynasty asserts itself in the north. There too, women increasingly take over important posts. One of them is Neshons. In the 19th century, locals discover an extraordinary necropolis near the temple of Hatshepsut. Instead of a single tomb, they find a veritable depository of mummies, the so-called royal cachette of Deir el-Bahari. More than 40 sarcophagi are stored here to protect them from tomb raiders. The mummies of Hatshepsut, Thutmose III and Ramses II were brought here, and the mummy of a Neshons. Who is this unknown, buried among royals? As Stele reveals, Neshons bore titles usually reserved for men: Viceroy of Kush, Overseer of the Foreigners, and Priestess of Khnum. This would have made her one of the most powerful women of her time. Not surprisingly, her funerary goods are of high quality. Canopic jars of calcite, a finely scripted Book of the Dead, and glazed eusheptis. That she could afford them is confirmed by a decree that was placed in her grave, a kind of ancient Egyptian receipt. Yet Neshons is not the only woman holding extraordinary power in the third intermediate period. With the transition to the late period, a group of priestesses rises to royal dignitaries, the spouses of Amen. "1,200 years earlier, Amen becomes king of all gods. The center of his cult is the temple complex at Karnak, which continues to grow over the centuries. Karnak develops into the most important cult site and the leading economic center of Egypt.
Karnak was like the Vatican of ancient Egypt. It's the sacred center. The high priest of Amen eventually, after the New Kingdom and into the late period, becomes almost equal to Pharaoh, and then actually equal to Pharaoh, and is eventually shown at a bigger scale than Pharaoh himself. So you have this, interesting development where the gods become more powerful and the Pharaoh less so.
Yet the prosperous religious center of Karnak is no longer under the control of a man. In the tomb of Pabasa, the chief financial administrator at Karnak, paintings and inscriptions show that a woman was in charge here during the late period. As a spouse of Amen, she's supreme servant of the king of the gods, and thus mistress of the riches of Karnak. The spouses of Amen are priestesses. They're considered wives of the highest god. Their task is to take care of the earthly needs of Amen. According to ancient Egyptian belief, he regularly descends from heaven to the temple. If he finds everything to his satisfaction, he will protect the land. In the late period, Amen's wives are at the zenith of their power. They perform ritual acts previously reserved for the pharaoh, such as the driving of the 4 calves. They appear in line with Horus and Isis, and thus at eye level with the gods. In the late period, after a succession of Libyan, Nubian and Assyrian rulers, Egyptians reclaim the pharaoh's throne. Yet the so-called Egyptian restoration remains an episode. In 525 BC, the Persians become overlords of the empire. After the Battle of Issos in 333 BC, Egypt falls to Alexander the Great. The late period ends. Now the Greek Ptolemies rule the empire on the Nile.